Welcome to the channel, where we understand great works, not just read them. Today, we follow one of the most famous heroes in world literature on a journey filled with storms, monsters, temptation, hardship, and an unending longing for home. After 10 years of bloody war, the seemingly unbreakable walls of Troy finally fell. The city burned as the Greek warriors celebrated their long-awaited victory. Among the victors was Odysseus, king of Ithaca, the man whose idea of the Trojan horse had helped bring about the fall of Troy. With his warriors and 12 ships, he finally set sail for his distant homeland. Waiting for him in Ithaca were his wife, Penelope, and his young son, Telemachus, who had been only a baby when his father left to fight at Troy. But a voyage that should have lasted only a few weeks turned into 10 years of wandering, filled with storms, monsters, gods, and death. While Odysseus vanished across distant seas, dozens of young noblemen took over his palace, convinced that the king would never return. Each of these suitors wanted to marry Penelope, seize Odysseus's wealth, and become the new ruler of Ithaca. To delay the marriage, Penelope promised that she would choose a new husband only after completing a burial shroud for the elderly Laertes, Odysseus's father. Each day, she wove before the suitor's eyes. But every night, when the palace had fallen asleep, she secretly unraveled everything she had made. In the meantime, Telemachus had grown into a young man, yet he remained powerless in his own home. The suitors humiliated him and even plotted to remove him. Then the goddess Athena appeared. As Odysseus's protector, she encouraged Telemachus to grow in courage and set out in search of his father. Inspired by Athena, Telemachus left Ithaca and sailed across the sea, determined to discover what had happened to Odysseus. He first visited the wise King Nestor at Pylos, but Nestor had no reliable news and advised him to continue to Sparta. There, Telemachus was welcomed by Menelaus and Helen, who still remembered Odysseus's courage and intelligence during the Trojan War. In Sparta, Telemachus finally learned that his father was still alive, but that he was being held on a distant island far from home. Odysseus had already spent 7 years on the island of Ogygia, yet every day he sat beside the sea, gazing toward the horizon and longing for Ithaca. The nymph Calypso loved him and offered him eternal youth and immortality if he would abandon his homeland and remain with her forever. But the gods finally took pity on him. Zeus sent Hermes to order Calypso to release Odysseus at once. Reluctantly, Calypso gave him wood, tools, food, and water. Odysseus built a raft and once again began his journey toward Ithaca. But Poseidon saw him upon the sea. The furious god raised a terrible storm, and enormous waves shattered Odysseus's raft. After 2 days of swimming, Odysseus reached the land of the Phaeacians, where he was discovered by the young princess Nausicaa. Nausicaa directed Odysseus toward the palace of her father. King Alcinous and Queen Arete welcomed the unknown traveler with great respect. During a feast, the blind singer Demodocus performed a song about the Trojan War and the heroes who had fought beneath the walls of Troy. As Odysseus listened to the story of Troy and his fallen companions, he could no longer hold back his tears. The memories of war came alive before him once again. The king noticed his grief and asked him to reveal his identity. At last, the stranger announced that he was Odysseus, king of Ithaca. Odysseus then began the story of everything that had happened since he left Troy. His warriors first attacked and plundered the city of the Cicones. But instead of leaving immediately, Odysseus's men remained behind. The following morning, the Cicones returned with reinforcements and killed many of the Greek warriors. After further wandering, the survivors reached the land of the Lotus Eaters, a peaceful people who offered their guests the mysterious lotus plant. As soon as some of the sailors tasted it, they forgot Ithaca and lost all desire to return home. Odysseus was forced to drag them back to the ships. Their next destination was the island of the Cyclopes. Inside a vast cave, they found sheep, milk, and large amounts of cheese, but there was no sign of the owner. Soon, Polyphemus returned, a gigantic one-eyed Cyclops and the son of Poseidon. He rolled an enormous stone across the entrance and trapped the men inside the cave. Instead of offering them hospitality, Polyphemus seized two of the sailors. Before the horrified eyes of their companions, he killed and devoured them. Odysseus knew that they could not simply kill the Cyclops. Only Polyphemus was strong enough to move the massive stone blocking the exit. Odysseus offered him powerful wine. When the Cyclops asked for his name, Odysseus cleverly replied, "My name is Nobody." When Polyphemus fell asleep, the Greeks heated a sharpened wooden stake and, using all their strength, drove it into his single eye. Polyphemus screamed for help, shouting that nobody was attacking him. The other Cyclopes believed that no one was harming him, and so they left him alone. The next morning, Odysseus tied his men beneath the bellies of the Cyclops' rams. In this way, they passed unnoticed beneath the hands of the blinded Polyphemus. But once the ship had moved away from the shore, pride overcame Odysseus. He shouted that it was not Nobody who had blinded the Cyclops, but Odysseus, king of Ithaca. Polyphemus then called upon his father, Poseidon, and prayed that Odysseus would return home late, alone, and surrounded by suffering. Later, Aeolus, lord of the winds, gave Odysseus a leather bag in which he had trapped every wind that might drive the ships away from Ithaca. After 9 days of sailing, Ithaca was already visible on the horizon. But the exhausted Odysseus fell asleep just before reaching home. While he slept, his men became convinced that the bag contained gold. Overcome by curiosity and greed, they secretly opened it. At once, all the imprisoned winds escaped. The sea erupted into chaos, and the ships were driven far away from the shores of Ithaca. They next arrived in the land of the Laestrygonians, terrifying cannibal giants who hurled enormous rocks at the Greek fleet. One by one, the ships were smashed and sunk. Of the entire fleet, only the ship commanded by Odysseus escaped destruction. The last surviving vessel reached a beautiful but mysterious island. Deep within its forest stood the palace of the sorceress Circe. Circe welcomed the sailors with food and an enchanted drink. Then, with a single spell, she transformed the confused men into pigs. On his way to confront her, Odysseus met Hermes. The god gave him a magical herb that would protect him from Circe's powers. When her magic failed, Odysseus drew his sword and forced Circe to restore his companions to human form. Circe then received them as honored guests. They remained with her for an entire year, enjoying food, wine, and a life free from danger. But the journey had to continue. Circe revealed that before Odysseus could reach Ithaca, he first had to travel into the dark land of the dead. Odysseus dug a sacrificial pit and poured milk, honey, wine, and water into it. He then sacrificed 2 sheep and allowed their blood to flow into the pit, drawing the restless spirits of the dead toward him. Soon, countless shadows gathered around the blood-filled pit. Among the spirits, Odysseus saw his mother, Anticlea. She had died from grief and longing while waiting year after year for her son to return. Then the blind prophet Tiresias appeared. He warned Odysseus that even greater dangers and more difficult trials still lay ahead. Continuing their voyage, the sailors approached the island of the Sirens, whose beautiful voices lured travelers toward certain death. Odysseus wanted to hear their song. He therefore ordered his men to tie him firmly to the mast while he sealed their ears with wax. When the Sirens began to sing, Odysseus lost control of himself. He begged and commanded the sailors to release him, but they could not hear his voice and continued rowing with all their strength. The ship then entered a deadly strait. On one side waited Scylla, the 6-headed monster. On the other raged Charybdis, a violent whirlpool capable of swallowing an entire ship. As the sailors struggled to avoid the whirlpool, Scylla lowered her 6 heads and seized 6 of Odysseus's men. On the island of Thrinacia, they discovered the sacred cattle of Helios. Odysseus strictly warned his companions not to harm a single animal. But storms trapped them on the island for weeks. Their food disappeared, and the starving, exhausted sailors began to think about the forbidden cattle. While Odysseus slept, Eurylochus persuaded the others to break the command. The hungry sailors killed one of the sacred cattle of Helios. As soon as they returned to sea, Zeus carried out their punishment. A tremendous bolt of lightning struck the ship, shattered the mast, and set the vessel on fire. All of Odysseus's companions vanished beneath the waves. Only Odysseus survived, clinging to a piece of broken wood in the middle of the vast and merciless sea. After a long period of drifting, the waves finally carried him to a safe shore. Odysseus was alive, but completely exhausted and helpless. The Phaeacians eventually carried the sleeping hero back to his homeland of Ithaca. Beside him, they left the rich gifts they had given him for the journey. Athena warned Odysseus that his palace was filled with enemies. To protect him, she transformed him into an old, poor, and unrecognizable beggar. Disguised in this way, Odysseus visited Eumaeus, his faithful swineherd. Although Eumaeus did not recognize him, he welcomed the stranger with food, warmth, and respect. When Telemachus arrived, Athena removed Odysseus's disguise. Before the young prince once again stood the strong and proud king of Ithaca. At first, Telemachus could not believe what he was seeing. But when he finally understood the truth, father and son embraced and wept after 20 years of separation. Together with Eumaeus, they formed a secret plan. Odysseus would enter the palace as a beggar, while Telemachus would quietly remove the suitors' weapons. Disguised as an old beggar, Odysseus entered his own palace. Instead of respect, he was met with mockery, insults, and cruel humiliation. At the palace entrance lay Argos, Odysseus's old dog. Although no one else recognized his master, the faithful animal immediately sensed who he was. After seeing Odysseus one final time, Argos peacefully lowered his head. After 20 years of waiting, the loyal dog took his final breath. Later, while washing the stranger's feet, the elderly servant Euryclea noticed a scar from Odysseus's youth. At once, she realized that the man before her was truly her long-lost master. Then Penelope brought out Odysseus's great bow. She announced that she would marry the man who could string it and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads. One by one, the suitors attempted to bend the bow. But none possessed enough strength, and their confidence slowly turned into embarrassment. Then the beggar asked for permission to try. Before the astonished crowd, Odysseus lifted the bow with ease and strung it like its true master. With a steady hand and a precise eye, he released the arrow. It passed cleanly through all 12 axe heads without a single mistake. In that moment, Odysseus cast aside the appearance of the helpless beggar. Standing beside Telemachus, he finally revealed himself to the terrified suitors. The hall fell silent. Odysseus raised the bow toward the men who had dishonored his home for years, and the final reckoning began. Odysseus fired his first arrow at Antinous, the most arrogant leader of the suitors. In an instant, the celebration became panic and terror. Telemachus, Eumaeus, and the faithful cowherd Philoetius stood beside Odysseus. Together they faced the suitors, who desperately searched for weapons and a way out of the hall. The suitors attempted to overwhelm Odysseus through sheer numbers. But the king and his allies fought with determination, restoring the honor of his household. One by one, the suitors' resistance was broken. After years of lawlessness, silence finally returned to the palace. With tears in her eyes, the elderly Euryclea approached her master. The man she had waited 20 years to see was once again standing inside his own home. Penelope stood before Odysseus, but she was still afraid to believe him. Years of deception and false reports had taught her to remain cautious. To test him, Penelope mentioned a marriage bed. Only the true Odysseus knew that it had been built around the living trunk of an olive tree. When Odysseus revealed the secret, all of Penelope's doubts disappeared. After 20 years of separation, she finally embraced her husband. The following morning, Odysseus visited his elderly father, Laertes. When the old man learned the truth, he joyfully embraced the son he had believed lost. The relatives of the dead suitors then marched against Odysseus, seeking revenge. But with Athena's intervention, the desire for further bloodshed was brought to an end. Peace returned to Ithaca, and Odysseus once again ruled over his household and his people. I hope this retelling has helped you understand the Odyssey not only as a story of monsters, gods, and distant seas, but also as a timeless struggle to return to one's home, family, and true identity. Because every great journey teaches us that the real purpose is not simply to arrive, but to understand who we have become along the way. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments. Do Odysseus's intelligence and resourcefulness justify all of his actions? Close the book, but keep your mind open. Understanding is only the beginning. We will meet again in the next great work.